3 years ago, I was standing in my living room surrounded by a mountain of online purchases I'd just unboxed. Skincare products I hadn't finished from the last order, a blender still in its packaging next to a juicer I'd used twice, decorative items that looked great on my screen and ridiculous in my apartment. My bank statement that month showed $4,600 in outgoing charges. My savings balance showed $540. I was pulling in $67,000 a year. I had been earning above $52,000 for nearly 7 years, and I had almost nothing of substance to show for any of it. That same month, I stumbled across a podcast episode about a Japanese author named Yoshiko Murai, who had written extensively about a century-old household accounting method called Kakeibo. What stopped me wasn't the budgeting system itself. It was one small detail the host mentioned almost as a footnote. Murai had observed that many Japanese families she interviewed had been practicing variations of these money habits across multiple generations. Grandmothers teaching daughters, daughters teaching granddaughters. Entire family lines building slow, sturdy wealth using principles so elementary they almost felt embarrassing compared to the sophisticated investing content I'd been consuming on finance podcasts and Reddit threads for years. But the thing that genuinely rattled me was this. Japan and America treat money from completely opposite cultural frameworks. In America, spending signals success. New vehicle, new home renovation, new wardrobe every season, these are celebrations. Wealth is something you display. You wear it, you post it, you park it in your driveway. In Japan, wealth is deliberately concealed. Flaunting financial success is considered poor taste. Living with restraint isn't a burden, it's a mark of character. There's a Japanese word for this quality, setsumashi. It translates roughly as quietly modest, and it carries genuine social admiration. The less you show, the more you respect. In America, the less you show, the more people assume you can't afford to. Over the next 14 months, I began layering these Japanese money principles into my life, one at a time. I didn't switch careers, I didn't launch a side business, I didn't eliminate restaurants or cancel every streaming service. I simply replaced the philosophy that sat underneath my financial decisions. In those 14 months, I grew my savings from $540 to just over $22,000. Same employer, same paycheck, same neighborhood, same apartment, just a completely different mental framework. This is that framework. 10 Japanese money habits that quietly build lasting wealth and that most people in the West have never been introduced to. Kakeibo, the handwritten household ledger. This is the bedrock of the entire system, and it has been around for more than 120 years. Kakeibo was created in 1904 by Hani Motoko, widely recognized as Japan's first female journalist at a time when women in Japan had virtually no control over family finances. She designed it specifically as a tool for housewives to exercise financial agency using only a notebook and a pen. The mechanics are insulting in their simplicity. At the start of every month, you write 4 things by hand: total income expected, fixed expenses due, amount you intend to save, and what remains available to spend. Then each evening, you record every purchase and sort it into 4 buckets: necessities, desires, culture, books, learning, meaningful experiences, and surprise costs. At the end of the month, you sit with those numbers and answer 3 honest questions. How much did I actually save? What choices worked in my favor? What would I change going forward? That's the entire system. It sounds too bare bones to be effective. That's precisely why it works. What separates Kakeibo from every budgeting application on your phone is the physical act of writing. When you wave your card over a terminal and watch a number blink on a screen, your brain barely registers that a transaction happened. When you sit down at your kitchen table that evening and write Uber Eats, $38, desire, your hand is communicating something to your brain that no app dashboard ever could. You made a deliberate choice to spend $38 on food delivery. It was a want, not a need, not a cultural investment, a want. Practitioners report Kakeibo reducing unnecessary spending by as much as 38%. My own first month landed around 20%, which translated to roughly $1,300 saved from a notebook that cost less than $4 at a dollar store. The reason this matters so sharply in an American context is that nearly half of all adults in the U.S. entered this year with no budget of any kind, according to survey data. Among those who do budget, the majority rely on apps that automate the categorization process, which means the conscious recognition of spending never actually develops. The app handles the bookkeeping, and the brain stays disengaged. Kakeibo forces the brain into the process. Once that awareness is activated, it's very difficult to switch it back off. There's another dimension to Kakeibo worth sitting with. It has outlasted every budgeting trend, every personal finance app, every subscription-based money management platform, most of which cycle through popularity and abandonment within 2 years. The reason for its longevity is the 4-category structure: necessities, desires, culture, unexpected. 4 buckets. That's it. The sparseness isn't a weakness, it's the entire design. Every time you sort a purchase, you're making a judgment call that no algorithm can make on your behalf. Is this grocery run a necessity, or did you walk in for eggs and leave for $60 of things that caught your eye? Is this online certification course genuine culture, or is it a desire wearing the costume of self-improvement? Those categorization questions create what behavioral researchers call cognitive friction. Friction slows behavior. Slower behavior creates awareness. Awareness changes outcomes. American consumer culture is deeply invested in eliminating friction. Contactless payment, one-click checkout, automatic renewals. Frictionless feels efficient. In practice, frictionless spending is why the average American underestimates their monthly subscription costs by around $140 and their impulse spending by nearly $280. Kakeibo deliberately reintroduces friction as a feature, not a flaw. 2. Mottainai, the moral weight of waste. There is no clean English equivalent for this word, and that linguistic gap says something important. Mottainai is an emotional experience. It's the discomfort, the pang of regret that arises when something of value is squandered, discarded before its time, or treated as disposable. In Japanese culture, wasting a resource, whether food, fabric, money, or time, carries a kind of moral weight. When someone tosses food that was still edible or replaces something that could have been repaired, the cultural response isn't indifference, it's mottainai. What a waste. What a shame. Compare this to America, where waste is practically a design feature of the consumer economy. The USDA estimates that U.S. households discard roughly 31% of the food they purchase, approximately $2,300 per household each year, thrown directly into the bin. Americans shed around 85 pounds of clothing and textiles per person annually, per EPA figures. We swap out smartphones every 2 to 3 years, when most devices are built to last 4 to 5. We leave furniture on the curb when we move, rather than bring it with us. When I began applying mottainai to my own life, the first experiment I ran was tracking food waste. For 2 weeks, I photographed everything I threw away from my refrigerator and pantry. The volume was genuinely unsettling. Wilted greens, leftovers pushed to the back, a container of yogurt with 2 servings left, half a loaf of bread. I was discarding close to $45 of food per week, more than $2,300 annually from my refrigerator alone. I started planning meals around what I already had on hand, rather than what sounded appealing at the moment. I began freezing leftovers the same day I made them, instead of reassuring myself I'd eat them the next morning. I bought smaller quantities and shopped more frequently, instead of bulk purchasing items that spoiled before I finished them. Within about 10 weeks, my grocery spending had dropped by nearly 28%, not because I was eating less, because I was throwing away less. Mottainai extends far beyond food.
It reshapes your entire relationship with the things you own. You fix before you replace. You finish what you have before you buy the upgrade. You find a second use before you discard. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, repairing broken ceramics with gold or lacquer so that the repair becomes part of the object's story. The crack isn't a defect, it's history. Apply that to how you relate to your belongings, the jacket that's slightly worn, the phone with a small scratch, the piece of furniture that's a little dated. It still functions, it still serves you. Mottainai teaches you to recognize that value rather than reflexively reaching for the replacement. 3. Hara Hachi Bu, the wisdom of enough. This principle originates in Confucian philosophy and is practiced widely across Okinawa, Japan, a region with one of the densest concentrations of centenarians anywhere on Earth. The teaching is straightforward. Stop eating when you feel approximately 80% satisfied before reaching complete fullness. Most Americans eat until discomfort is the signal to stop. We pile portions, we supersize by default, we order starters, mains, and desserts, and feel a social obligation to finish everything because we paid for it. The financial implications of Hara Hachi Bu become profound when you move the principle beyond food and apply it to life as a whole philosophy of enough. It means you stop filling everything to full capacity. You leave margin. Margin in your meals, margin in your closet, margin in your schedule, margin in your spending. That remaining 20% isn't deprivation, it's breathing room. And breathing room is exactly where financial resilience lives. In practical financial terms, Hara Hachi Bu means treating roughly 20% of your income as untouchable. If you bring home $4,500 per month after taxes, you live as though your income is $3,600. The remaining $900 moves automatically into savings and investment accounts. You don't access it because in your spending reality, it doesn't exist. Your lifestyle calibrates to $3,600 because the human mind is remarkably adaptable when the option to spend more simply isn't present. The Bureau of Economic Analysis placed the U.S. personal savings rate at approximately 3.8% as of early 2026, just under 4%. Japanese financial culture, shaped in part by habits like Hara Hachi Bu, tends to target 20%. That 16-point gap doesn't look dramatic until you run the numbers. On a $65,000 salary, saving 4% means setting aside roughly $2,600 per year. Saving 20% means $13,000. Over 30 years at a modest 8% average market return, the difference between those two behaviors is the difference between accumulating approximately $318,000 and $1.59 million. Same income, same job, same city, just a different answer to the question of how much is enough. But the deeper layer of Hara Hachi Bu is the one that gets skipped in the financial content space. In Okinawa, it isn't taught as a dieting strategy or a savings hack. It's taught as a form of respect. Respect for the food because you honor it by not over-consuming. Respect for your body because you don't burden it beyond its needs. Respect for tomorrow because you preserve resources for your future self rather than depleting everything today. That word, respect, is what American financial culture is largely missing. The average American carries roughly $7,200 in credit card debt at interest rates above 22%. That debt is borrowed comfort. It's the financial equivalent of eating until you're overfull and then wondering why you feel terrible. Hara Hachi Bu applied to money is telling your future self, I didn't consume it all, I left something for you. 4. Kaizen, continuous invisible improvement. Most people in the Western business world know this concept from manufacturing. Toyota embedded it into their production philosophy and made the world globally recognized. But in Japanese daily life, Kaizen applies to everything, including personal finances. The principle, you don't attempt to transform your life through a single dramatic decision. You improve by 1% repeatedly over an extended period of time. Applied to money, Kaizen looks like this. This month, you cut dining out by 12%, not 50%, not cold turkey, just 12%. Next month, you nudge your retirement contribution up by 1%. The month after, you cancel one subscription you've been vaguely meaning to cancel. Then you renegotiate one monthly bill. Then you replace one name brand staple with the store equivalent. Each individual change feels almost negligible. Each change is small enough to require almost no willpower to execute. But 12 consecutive months of Kaizen produces a financial life that is categorically different from the one you started with, and you barely registered the transition while it was happening. The reason Kaizen outperforms dramatic financial overhauls is rooted in how the brain responds to change. The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, activates when you attempt major behavioral shifts. It interprets major changes as danger. This is why most people who slash their budget aggressively in January have abandoned it by the end of February. The change was too abrupt, the brain resisted, and willpower eventually ran out. Kaizen moves beneath the amygdala's radar. A 1% improvement doesn't register as a threat. These micro-changes accumulate quietly, undetected, until one morning you look at your savings rate and realize it moved from 5% to 21% over the course of a year, and you can't point to a single moment when the shift occurred.
5. Ikigai, money with a purpose. In the West, Ikigai has been popularized primarily as a career framework, the intersection of what you love, what you're skilled at, what the world needs, and what you can be compensated for. But in Japanese culture, Ikigai isn't primarily about career. It's about having a reason for being that gives your daily life structure, direction, and meaning. That purpose could be raising your children, cultivating a garden, mastering a craft, caring for elderly parents, or maintaining your health into old age. When you apply Ikigai to money, it does something that no spreadsheet, no budgeting app, and no investment calculator ever addresses. It answers the foundational question, what is the money actually for? Most Americans save without a concrete vision or spend without genuine intention. They set aside money because they've been told they're supposed to. They spend because something sparked momentary desire. There's no governing philosophy underneath either behavior. Ikigai gives you that philosophy. Once you've identified what your money is genuinely building toward, the specific life you're working to create, every financial choice becomes a vote for or against that life. Purchases that once felt appealing don't just feel expensive, they feel irrelevant. The willpower required to resist them drops to nearly nothing because they no longer compete with something meaningful. They simply don't fit the picture. 6. Wabi-Sabi, beauty in what already exists. This is one of the most quietly radical of all Japanese aesthetic and philosophical concepts, and it's a direct counterforce to the consumer culture that shapes most American spending patterns. Wabi-Sabi is the practice of finding beauty in things that are imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. A ceramic bowl with a chip that still holds tea, a dining table with scratches that record 20 years of family meals, a coat with a mended seam that reminds you of how long you've relied on it. In Wabi-Sabi, the history of an object is part of its value, not a detraction from it. In America, imperfection is a purchase trigger. Cracked phone screen, time to upgrade. Scuff on the sneakers, time for a new pair. Couch cushions slightly deflated, time to browse furniture websites. The consumer economy depends entirely on your dissatisfaction with things that still work. Wabi-Sabi invites you to find satisfaction in them instead. When you run the numbers on this shift, the financial impact over time becomes staggering. Americans spend approximately $10,200 per year in the categories most driven by aesthetic dissatisfaction: clothing, home goods, and consumer electronics.
If Wabi-Sabi reduced that spending by even 25% through keeping things longer, repairing instead of replacing, and finding satisfaction in what you already own, that's $2,550 per year redirected. Invested at 8% over 25 years, that philosophical shift is worth roughly $197,000, built from nothing more than deciding to appreciate what you already have. 7. Osoji, the annual financial reset. In Japan, osoji is an annual tradition. Families conduct a thorough, intentional cleaning of their entire home, clearing out what no longer serves them, restoring order, and stepping into the new year with physical and mental clarity. It's less like spring cleaning and more like a deliberate ritual of release. Applied to your financial life, osoji becomes an annual audit. Once per year, December or January works well, you sit down and examine every single layer of your financial picture. Every subscription, every recurring charge, every insurance policy, every investment allocation, every debt balance, every automatic renewal. You review it all, cancel what stopped serving you, renegotiate what can be reduced, and realign everything with where you actually are now and what you actually want. Most people establish financial systems and then step away from them indefinitely. Subscriptions accumulate in the background, insurance premiums drift upward quietly, investment allocations drift away from targets. An annual osoji catches all of it before it compounds into significant loss. In my first financial osoji, I identified $342 per month in charges I had either completely forgotten about or no longer received value from. That's $4,104 per year draining silently from my account while my attention was elsewhere.
8. Chokin. Save first, then live. Chokin means savings in Japanese, but within Japanese financial culture, it represents a specific behavioral sequence. You save before you spend, not whatever happens to remain at the end of the month. The moment income arrives, a portion of it exits immediately into a savings or investment vehicle. Whatever remains is what you have to live on. This is structurally the opposite of the default American pattern. The typical American sequence is earn, spend throughout the month, and hope something survives to save. The Japanese Chokin model is earn, save immediately, then spend what remains. The distinction sounds minor. It isn't. When saving occurs first, spending naturally adjusts to fit the remaining amount. When saving is attempted last, the remaining amount is almost always zero, because expenses reliably expand to fill whatever income is available. Parkinson's law applies to money exactly as it applies to time. Spending expands to fill the income available. Chokin breaks that pattern by reducing the available income before spending begins. In the US, the closest equivalent to Chokin is automating your savings and investment transfers to execute on the morning after your paycheck deposits. The Vanguard How America Saves report found that automated enrollment in escalation features were the primary drivers of increased 401k contribution rates, not personal discipline, not financial education, not willpower. The people saving the most aren't more motivated, they've simply automated the sequence correctly. They're running Chokin without knowing the word. Here's what Chokin looks like in concrete terms. Priya earns $5,100 per month after taxes. Under the typical American approach, she spends throughout the month and saves what's left. In reality, nothing is ever left. Her savings rate sits around 2.5%, roughly $128 per month, and even that only exists because her employer takes a small 401k percentage before she sees her paycheck. Now imagine Priya implements Chokin. On the morning after payday, an automatic transfer moves $1,020, 20%, into a combination of her Roth IRA and a high-yield savings account. She never interacts with that money. Her financial reality becomes $4,080 per month. Within about 6 to 8 weeks, she adjusts. The brain recalibrates when the option to spend more doesn't exist. After 1 year,
Priya has saved and invested $12,240. Her previous approach produced roughly $1,536. Over 20 years at 8% returns, Priya's Chokin habit generates approximately $609,000. Her old habit generates around $76,000. Same salary, same expenses, same city. The only variable is when saving happens in the sequence. Credit card debt is relatively uncommon in Japan, partly because of this habit. Most Japanese credit cards are configured to pay the full balance automatically each month. Carrying a revolving balance is culturally atypical. In the US, nearly half of all cardholders carry a balance month to month, and total credit card debt surpassed $1.3 trillion at the close of 2025, according to the New York Federal Reserve. The structural difference isn't income. Japan's median household income is lower than America's. The difference is sequence. Save first, spend second. 9. Shinrin-yoku, the art of free living. Shinrin-yoku translates literally as forest bathing. It describes the practice of spending quiet, deliberate time in natural surroundings as a form of mental restoration and stress reduction. It costs nothing. But the broader principle it represents is what I've come to call free living. The intentional choice to build your leisure, your social life, and your recreation around activities that carry no price tag. In America, leisure and spending have become nearly synonymous. Fun costs money, relaxation costs money. A night out, a weekend trip, a concert, a shopping trip marketed as entertainment, even the act of socializing has been thoroughly monetized. The average American household spends close to $3,400 annually on entertainment alone, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Japanese cultural life offers a fundamentally different template: walking, cooking together, reading, growing things, visiting parks, shrines, and public spaces, preparing tea at home. The most meaningful daily moments happen without a transaction. When I began structuring my weekends around zero-cost activities, cooking with friends at home, neighborhood walks, library visits, sitting in public parks, my entertainment spending dropped by more than 65% within 3 months. I didn't experience it as loss. The quality of my weekends improved because I stopped treating enjoyment as something you purchase and started treating it as something you inhabit. 10. Hansei, honest monthly reflection. This is the final habit, and it is the mechanism that holds every other habit in place. Hansei is a Japanese practice of sincere, rigorous self-examination. It is not self-punishment. It is not guilt. It is an honest reckoning with what you did, what worked, what didn't, and what you'll approach differently going forward. In Japanese schools, children practice Hansei regularly. It's a cultural value, not an emergency response. You don't reflect because you failed. You reflect because reflection is how growth happens. Applied to finances, Hansei is the monthly review that closes the Kakeibo loop. You sit with your notebook, look at what you spent and what you saved, and ask yourself 3 questions without self-criticism. Did I meet my savings goal this month? Which purchases added genuine, lasting value to my life? What would I change if I could do the month again? This 10-minute monthly practice is the most important habit on this list, not because it produces the most immediate results, but because it's the mechanism by which all the other habits improve. Mottainai sharpens because you begin to notice the waste more precisely. Hara Hachibu becomes easier because you can see exactly where you overfilled. Kaizen finds direction because you can identify the next small improvement. Without Hansei, the other habits plateau. With it, they compound. The compound effect of a different philosophy. Everything described in this piece operates on the same underlying principle as compound interest: small, consistent inputs repeated over time, producing outcomes wildly disproportionate to the apparent effort involved. A $3 notebook and 10 minutes of attention per day doesn't sound like a wealth-building program. Neither does eating until you're 80% full or choosing to find beauty in a scratched piece of furniture. But these micro-behaviors, layered on top of each other, practiced week after week and month after month, produce something that no income level can generate on its own: a relationship with money that is grounded, intentional, and self-sustaining. The financially secure people I've studied, not the flashiest earners, not the highest paid professionals, but the ones with the deepest, most durable financial stability and the least financial anxiety, share one trait. They understand how money actually works. They understand compound growth. They understand the real difference between an asset and a liability. They understand that a dollar saved arrives without tax, without effort, without burnout. That understanding has a name: financial literacy. It's the soil every one of these Japanese habits grows in. Without it, Kakeibo is just a notebook. Mottainai is just a word you heard somewhere and forgot about by next week. With financial literacy, these habits become a cohesive system: quiet, unglamorous, and profoundly effective, that builds wealth the same way a Japanese garden grows, slowly, intentionally, with everything placed for a reason. Nothing wasted, nothing rushed, nothing performed for an audience. The person I was 3 years ago, standing in a living room full of things she didn't need, bought with money she didn't have, she didn't need a higher salary. She needed a different operating system. She needed to understand that wealth isn't built primarily by earning more. It's built by understanding more. The habits followed the understanding. The results followed the habits. Japan worked this out a long time ago. These principles have survived economic crises, global conflicts, and generational upheaval because they're not built on tactics. They're built on respect. For money is a finite resource, for yourself as the steward of that resource, and for the future self you are quietly building toward. You may already earn enough. You might just need a notebook, a pen, and the willingness to actually pay attention to where it's all going. That's where it begins. That's where it always begins.